Bringing capital ships into the universe, we knew that they would be a focal point for combat. We didn't want a solo player to be able to take these ships on by themselves. We wanted it to be a coordinated group effort.
And all these weapons coming together, all these new turrets behaviour coming together, and it all works as one unit. We basically set out to create an event that felt like it came with the gravity of having the capital ships in the scene, and also create the strategy around these ships to kind of take them down as well.
To achieve that goal of combat, we took the high level and then we had to work on all the small pieces that add together. There was no one thing that made fighting capital ships be possible. It was a collaborative effort of lots of little pieces.
The main thing I wanted to do when we were bringing in capital ships was ensure that we didn't make the common mistake that a lot of games do, and that's when you bring in something big and new, that you make it overpowered.
It was about creating the balance of all these things coming together, where there was several different aspects to the battle scene itself.
Things like improving the turret behaviours, so not only did they attack fighters, but they attacked incoming missiles, which are a huge threat to capital ships.
Turrets on a capital ship will try and pick bombers as their targets over dinky little fighters, because the fighters aren't going to be nearly as much of a threat.
We worked on countermeasures to make them more reliable and also more engaging from both the defender's point of view of launching them and from the aggressor's point of dealing with them.
We put a lot of effort into making sure that we balanced the way countermeasured worked. They wouldn't spam them all the time. You now have to fire enough off to generate enough noise to hide your ship.
And we needed all the components to work to kind of bring Xeno threat alive, which was the big capital ships. We had the Idris, we had the Javelin.
The Idris has the big railgun underneath that needed to have its behaviour adjusted so that it always tried to be nose on to larger targets and not just to try and use its railgun on a Mustang. It would only pick it for the larger ships.
The Javelin is different. It wants to get within the turret range of its target.
Whilst the Idris is trying to get its nose onto the target, the Javelin is always trying to keep its side against the larger targets to deal with them.
Once we had that scene together, it was a case of how do we make this sound good? How do we make this look good? You know, and how do we kind of match those expectations that players have with the balance that we implemented? And it ended up looking really nice. We have these big capital ships just taking chunks off each other. The big thing that changes with this is how many players are in the scene at the time. It can play drastically different if there's only 5 of you or 10 of you trying to take the ship down. But then if some group decides to bring in 30 players in their team, it will play drastically different.
It sort of worked how we expected. We knew players would be trying to hijack the things and was amazed by how they did it. We'd put a few precautions in there to try and prevent that, but guys always managed to find a way.
Hearing the players go, oh, you know, I use this weapon, or I came in at this time, I use this ship at this time, and that's how we brought it down. And that's just really exciting listening to those streams. So, you know, we are watching.
There's definitely areas that we want to improve on. The AI is still not where we want it to be in terms of target selection. It does a very good job to a point, but it can still get overwhelmed at times.
You know, there's times where I was watching people play and they would do, and basically it was impossible to shoot the Idris down, and I was like, no. And then it was good to figure out why, and then we make some changes, and then sometimes it'd swing the other way where we had 30 people in the scene, you know, trying to bring this ship down, and it'd destroy itself in 30 seconds. And this is what's really good about having a live environment in Star Citizen, is we get to do it as we go. So we get to have the players involved, and it massively helps us as the developers. We could put this out there on a Saturday evening, and we get the players playing this, and we'll get the feedback in, and then we can look in the morning, you know, and go, right, you know, so what happened? You know, let's have a review of this.
Watching, you know, the turrets shoot down torpedoes, watching the torpedoes just smash into the side of these huge ships and the Idris just take it. Watching it all play out has been fantastic.
We want to take capital ship fights further in the future. There's some weapon systems that those ships aren't using yet, which is their own missile and torpedo systems. We want to provide further expanded combat opportunities for these ships, both in terms of the players doing it and their threats back to you.
Capital ship combat may have brought many different game systems into development focus, but one long-discussed technology was essential to ensuring these massive behemoths wouldn't be taken down by players mere moments after they arrived. So let's take a look at how SDF shields came to be for the Idris and the Javelin before they're rolled out to all spacecraft in the coming months.
There was a lot of work that actually went into getting us to the point where we are now in terms of having impact effects that are defined by the science distance field.
SDF shields were a huge part of the whole suite needed to bring capital ship combat to fruition.
The mesh shaping tech is something that I haven't seen in any other game before.
Our previous shield technology is getting quite old now and it had some limitations. Primarily on the setup side, you had to have duplicated data to detect the hits, and then that displayed to a completely independent bubble mesh which had no actual relevance to gameplay. It was just purely there for visuals.
They're really limited in terms of if the wing breaks off, the mesh can't adapt to that. With SDFs they can.
A big reason why we needed new SDF shields as well was because we needed to support the new visual effects on the shields. So we could really communicate to the player the firepower and the impact that their firepower had on the ships. Because we changed the weapon balance, a lot of the weapons now, especially the size 9 torpedoes, offer so much more firepower than they've ever had in Star Citizen. And that massively changed the demands of the shields and what it takes to take them down.
So if you're shooting the ship with a size 1 weapon, you may only see a small little energy flare on the surface of the shield, but if you shoot it with a size 10 cannon, the impact may wrap around half of the ship.
In the old system, it would glow blue, and then it would go when the shield was down. You had no idea whether you were 99% of the shield face or you had 1. Whereas with SDF shields, we've got a lot more flexibility now in providing reads on that, and you will see that they transition through the colours as it gets closer to coming down. That gives a huge gameplay impact.
We have several techniques how to displace and sort of have the SDF control individual particles.
We started to look at using mesh-based particles, being able to actually splat the mesh particles to the shape of the ship.
And then on that mesh we can play animated textures.
We had what we call glue, so there was like a glue option to essentially make that projection. We could kind of control where that actually is offset from the ship, and we settled on the name glue.
And then we also have a volumetric component where it renders a volumetric shape which ties all of these elements together for the final effect.
We knew quite early on that we were also going to be able to use science distance fields for other types of effects, so we needed a safer type of effect, and I thought that atmospheric entry was a more safe effect.
It was the first bit of tech to use the SDF. The effects are colliding with the SDF, and it allows the fire and flames to hug the surface of the ship more realistically and much tighter.
There's quite a few things that we haven't done yet that we know we want to do. All we've got at the moment is the actual impact effects. What we actually need to do in the future is actually have the powering on and powering off states as well.
The initial release of SDF shields is just for the Idris and Javelin, and it's only really for their detection of hits and the displaying of hits.
Going forward, we plan to roll this shield tech out to the rest of the ships, and when we have most of the ships in a pretty good position, we are going to start looking at fleshing out the various types of shields, the style, the manufacturer, and the race. So Van Duel may have a completely different looking shield than the human shield.
A lot of the work that we've done for the shield SDF effects will just help us with our effects in general. There's loads of other ways we can use SDFs. There's loads of other ways that we can use lots of the individual elements that came together to make the shield effects. We could just use them generically for VFX in our game in general, and that's going to just give us that next level of quality and flexibility.
So what did we learn this week? Well, we learned how the most recent big step in space combat came to be with the arrival of capital ships like the Idris in Alpha 3.12. That the Javelin benefits from many of those same technologies during the brand new Xenothreat event. And that while SDF shields were a huge part in making both of those things possible, the next big step forward for combat is when they come online for every other spacecraft. For Inside Star Citizen, I'm Jared Huckabee. We'll see you all next week.